a WikiVidi documentaries production. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Enjoy. Georges Bizet. Georges Bizet, registered at birth as Alexandre César Léopold Bizet, was a French composer of the Romantic era. Best known for his operas in a career cut short by his early death, Bizet achieved few successes before his final work, Carmen, which has become one of the most popular and frequently performed works in the entire opera repertoire. During a brilliant student career at the Conservatoire de Paris, Bizet won many prizes, including the prestigious Prix de Rome in 1857. He was recognized as an outstanding pianist, though he chose not to capitalize on this skill and rarely performed in public. Returning to Paris after almost 3 years in Italy, he found that the main Parisian opera theatres preferred the established classical repertoire to the works of newcomers. His keyboard and orchestral compositions were likewise largely ignored. As a result, his career stalled, and he earned his living mainly by arranging and transcribing the music of others. Restless for success, he began many theatrical projects during the 1860s, most of which were abandoned. Neither of his 2 operas that reached the stage in this time, Les Pêcheurs de Perles and La Jolie Fille de Berthe, were immediately successful. After the Franco-Prussian War of 1870-1871, during which Bizet served in the National Guard, he had little success with his one-act opera Jamilé. Though an orchestral suite derived from his incidental music to Alphonse Daudet's play La Lésienne was instantly popular, the production of Bizet's final opera, Carmen, was delayed because of fears that its themes of betrayal and murder would offend audiences. After its premiere on 3 March 1875, Bizet was convinced that the work was a failure. He died of a heart attack 3 months later, unaware that it would prove a spectacular and enduring success. Bizet's marriage to Geneviève Olivier was intermittently happy and produced 1 son. After his death, his work, apart from Carmen, was generally neglected. Manuscripts were given away or lost, and published versions of his works were frequently revised and adapted by other hands. He founded no school and had no obvious disciples or successors. After years of neglect, his works began to be performed more frequently in the 20th century. Later commentators have acclaimed him as a composer of brilliance and originality whose premature death was a significant loss to French musical theatre. Family background and childhood. Georges Bizet was born in Paris on the 25th of October 1838. He was registered as Alexandre César Léopold, but baptized as Georges on the 16th of March 1840, and was known by this name for the rest of his life. His father, Adolphe Bizet, had been a hairdresser and wigmaker before becoming a singing teacher despite his lack of formal training. He also composed a few works, including at least 1 published song. In 1837 Adolphe married Aimée Delsarte, against the wishes of her family who considered him a poor prospect. The Delsartes, though impoverished, were a cultured and highly musical family. Aimée was an accomplished pianist, while her brother François Delsarte was a distinguished singer and teacher who performed at the courts of both Louis-Philippe and Napoleon III. François Delsarte's wife Rossini, a musical prodigy, had been an assistant professor of solfège at the Conservatoire de Paris at the age of 13. Bizet's maternal grandparents were Jewish, which made him Jewish according to Jewish religious law. He was, however, raised a Christian in his father's religion. Georges, an only child, showed early aptitude for music and quickly picked up the basics of musical notation from his mother, who probably gave him his first piano lessons. By listening at the door of the room where Adolphe conducted his classes, Georges learned to sing difficult songs accurately from memory and developed an ability to identify and analyze complex chordal structures. This precocity convinced his ambitious parents that he was ready to begin studying at the Conservatoire even though he was still only 9 years old. Georges was interviewed by Joseph Mayford, the horn virtuoso who was a member of the Conservatoire's Committee of Studies. Mayford was so struck by the boy's demonstration of his skills that he waived the age rule and offered to take him as soon as a place became available. Conservatoire. Bizet was admitted to the Conservatoire on the 9th of October 1848, 2 weeks before his 10th birthday. He made an early impression. Within 6 months he had won first prize in solfège, a feat that impressed Pierre-Joseph Guillaume Zimmermann. the Conservatoire's former professor of piano. Zimmermann gave Bizet private lessons in counterpoint and fugue, which continued until the old man's death in 1853. Through these classes, Bizet met Zimmermann's son-in-law, the composer Charles Gounod, who became a lasting influence on the young pupil's musical style. Although their relationship was often strained in later years, he also met another of Gounod's young students, the 13-year-old Camille Saint-Saëns, who remained a firm friend of Bizet's. Under the tuition of Antoine-François Marmontel, the Conservatoire's professor of piano, Bizet's pianism developed rapidly. He won the Conservatoire's second prize for piano in 1851, and first prize the following year. Bizet would later write to Marmontel, "In your class one learns something besides the piano. One becomes a musician." At the end of his first year, Bizet was required to submit a religious composition, but due to his atheism, he declined and wrote a comic opera instead, which was accepted by the committee. Bizet's first preserved compositions, two wordless songs for soprano, date from around 1850. In 1853, he joined Mental Halavy's composition class and began to produce works of increasing sophistication and quality. Two of his songs, Petite Marguerite and La Rosette l'Abbé, were published in 1854. In 1855, he wrote an ambitious overture for a large orchestra, and prepared four-hand piano versions of two of Gounod's works, the opera La Nonna Sanglante and the Symphony in D. Bizet's work on the Gounod Symphony inspired him, shortly after his 17th birthday, to write his own symphony, which bore a close resemblance to Gounod's, note for note in some passages. Bizet's symphony was subsequently lost, rediscovered in 1933 and finally performed in 1935. In 1856, Bizet competed for the prestigious Prix de Rome. His entry was not successful, but nor were any of the others. The musician's prize was not awarded that year. After this rebuff, Bizet entered an opera competition which Jacques Offenbach had organized for young composers, with a prize of 1,200 francs. The challenge was to set the one-act libretto of Le Docteur Miracle by Léon Batu and Ludovic Olavie. The prize was awarded jointly to Bizet and Charles Lecoq, a compromise which years later Lecoq criticized on the grounds of the jury's manipulation by Fromental Olavie in favor of Bizet. As a result of his success, Bizet became a regular guest at Offenbach's Friday evening parties, where among other musicians he met the aged Gioacchino Rossini, who presented the young man with a signed photograph. Bizet was a great admirer of Rossini's music, and wrote not long after their first meeting that Rossini is the greatest of them all, because like Mozart, he has all the virtues. For his 1857 Prix de Rome entry, Bizet, with Gounod's enthusiastic approval, chose to set the cantata Clovis et Clotilde by Amédée Berian. Bizet was awarded the prize after a ballot of the members of the Académie des Beaux-Arts overturned the judge's initial decision, which was in favor of the oboist Charles Collin. Under the terms of the award, Bizet received a financial grant for 5 years, the first 2 to be spent in Rome, the third in Germany and the final 2 in Paris. The only other requirement was the submission each year of an envoi, a piece of original work to the satisfaction of the Académie. Before his departure for Rome in December 1857, Bizet's prize cantata was performed at the Académie to an enthusiastic reception. Rome, 1858-1860. On the 27th of January 1858, Bizet arrived at the Villa Medici, a 16th-century palace that since 1803 had housed the French Académie in Rome, and which he described in a letter home as paradise. Under its director, the painter Jean-Victor Schantz, the villa provided an ideal environment in which Bizet and his fellow laureates could pursue their artistic endeavors. Bizet relished the convivial atmosphere, and quickly involved himself in the distractions of its social life. In his first 6 months in Rome, his only composition was a Te Deum written for the Rodriguez Prize, a competition for a new religious work open to Prix de Rome winners. This piece failed to impress the judges, who awarded the prize to Adrian Barth, the only other entrant. Bizet was discouraged to the extent that he vowed to write no more religious music. His Te Deum remained forgotten and unpublished until 1971. Through the winter of 1858-59, Bizet worked on his first envoy, an opera buffa setting of Carlo Cambiagio's libretto Don Procopio. Under the terms of his prize, Bizet's first envoy was supposed to be a mass, but after his Te Deum experience, he was averse to writing religious music. He was apprehensive about how this breach of the rules would be received at the Academy, but their response to Don Procopio was initially positive, with praise for the composer's easy and brilliant touch, and youthful and bold style. For his second envoy, not wishing to test the Academy's tolerance too far, Bizet proposed to submit a quasi-religious work in the form of a secular mass on a text by Horace. This work, entitled Carmen Seculaire, was intended as a song to Apollo and Diana. No trace exists, and it is unlikely that Bizet ever started it. A tendency to conceive ambitious projects, only to quickly abandon them, became a feature of Bizet's Rome years. In addition to Carmen Seculaire, he considered and discarded at least 5 opera projects, 2 attempts at a symphony, and a symphonic ode on the theme of Ulysses and Circe. After Don Procopio, Bizet completed only one further work in Rome, the symphonic poem Vasco da Gama. This replaced Carmen Seculaire as his second envoy, and was well received by the Academy, though swiftly forgotten thereafter. In the summer of 1859, Bizet and several companions traveled in the mountains and forests around Onogny and Frosinone. They also visited a convict settlement at Anzio. Bizet sent an enthusiastic letter to Marmontel, recounting his experiences. In August, he made an extended journey south to Naples and Pompeii, where he was unimpressed with the former, but delighted with the latter. Here you live with the ancients. You see their temples, their theatres, their houses in which you find their furniture, their kitchen utensils. Bizet began sketching a symphony based on his Italian experiences, but made little immediate headway. The project, which became his Roma Symphony, was not finished until 1868. On his return to Rome, Bizet successfully requested permission to extend his stay in Italy into a third year, rather than going to Germany, so that he could complete an important work. In September 1860, while visiting Venice with his friend and fellow laureate Ernest Guiraud, Bizet received news that his mother was gravely ill in Paris, and made his way home. Paris, 1860-1863. Back in Paris with 2 years of his grant remaining, Bizet was temporarily secure financially and could ignore, for the moment, the difficulties that other young composers faced in the city. The 2 state-subsidized opera houses, the Opera and the Opera Comique, each presented traditional repertoires that tended to stifle and frustrate new homegrown talent. Only 8 of the 54 Prix de Rome laureates between 1830 and 1860 had works staged at the opera. Although French composers were better represented at the Opera Comique, the style and character of productions had remained largely unchanged since the 1830s. A number of smaller theatres catered for operetta, a field in which Offenbach was then paramount, while the Théâtre Italien specialized in second-rate Italian opera. The best prospect for aspirant opera composers was the Théâtre Lyrique Company, which, despite repeated financial crises, operated intermittently in various premises under its resourceful manager Léon Carvalho. This company had staged the first performances of Gounod's Faust and his Romeo et Juliet, and of a shortened version of Boulez Les Troyens. On the 13th of March 1861, Bizet attended the Paris premiere of Wagner's opera Tannhauser, a performance greeted by audience riots that was stage-managed by the influential Jockey Club de Paris. Despite this distraction, Bizet revised his opinions of Wagner's music, which he had previously dismissed as merely eccentric. He now declared Wagner above and beyond all living composers. Thereafter, accusations of Wagnerism were often laid against Bizet throughout his compositional career. As a pianist, Bizet had showed considerable skill from his earliest years. A contemporary asserted that he could have assured a future on the concert platform, but chose to conceal his talent as though it were a vice. In May 1861, Bizet gave a rare demonstration of his virtuoso skills when, at a dinner party at which Liszt was present, he astonished everyone by playing on sight, flawlessly, one of the maestro's most difficult pieces. Liszt commented, "I thought there were only 2 men able to surmount the difficulties. There are 3, and the youngest is perhaps the boldest and most brilliant." Bizet's third envoy was delayed for nearly a year by the prolonged illness and death, in September 1861, of his mother. He eventually submitted a trio of orchestral works, an overture entitled La Chasse d'Ossian, a scherzo and a funeral march. The overture has been lost. The scherzo was later absorbed into the Roma Symphony, and the funeral march music was adapted and used in a later opera. Bizet's fourth and final envoy, which occupied him for much of 1862, was a one-act opera, L'Argile de l'Emir. As a state-subsidized theatre, the Opéra Comique was obliged from time to time to stage the works of Prix de Rome laureates, and L'Argile duly went into rehearsal in 1863. However, in April Bizet received an offer, which originated from Count Walewski, to compose the music for a three-act opera. This was Les Pêcheurs de Perles, based on a libretto by Michel Carré and Eugène Corman. Because a condition of this offer was that the opera should be the composer's first publicly staged work, Bizet hurriedly withdrew L'Argile from production and incorporated parts of its music into the new opera. The first performance of Les Pêcheurs de Perles, by the Théâtre Lyrique Company, was on 30th of September 1863. Critical opinion was generally hostile, though Berlioz praised the work, writing that it does Bizet the greatest honor. Public reaction was lukewarm, and the opera's run ended after 18 performances. It was not performed again until 1886. In 1862, Bizet had fathered a child with the family's housekeeper, Marie Reiter. The boy was brought up to believe that he was Adolphe Bizet's child. Only on her deathbed in 1913 did Reiter reveal her son's true paternity. Brought to you by WikiVidi Documentaries. Would you like to know more?